Is it possible to win more votes on election night but lose something more valuable? Your reputation, your standing in the community. What about your honor? I think that answer is an obvious yes. We've seen too many women and men chase public office using whatever it takes to win. But is it possible to win on all those fronts but ultimately lose an election? That's the question we'll explore tonight with someone who knows about winning and now knows something about loss. Even if you're not political, this is an important conversation. You don't want to miss this one. Stay with us. Imagine that one day you're one of your party's rising stars. You have a bright future. You're in what's considered a safe seat for re-election. You're respected by colleagues. The future looks bright. Then, in a single day, everything changes and you've been forced to run against one of your colleagues in the same party. Someone who agrees with you on most issues, someone who carries similar standing and respect. But to win, you'll have to go on the attack. You'll have to spend money to create reasonable doubt in the minds of voters. If the place works, if you'll win, he'll lose, and you'll spend the rest of your life trying to patch things up. Sound far-fetched? Well, it's not. That's exactly what happened to a young member of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives, and he's here with me today in the studio. Representative John Hershey, welcome to State of Independence.
Yep, thank you for having me.
So tell our viewers, who you are. Where are you from, first of all? Where were you born, and tell us a little bit about the family you were born into.
Yep, so I was born into a family that later moved to Juniata County when I was a young kid. My dad...
Any relation to the Hershey chocolate family?
I wish. I may not have served in the state legislature if that were the case. Yeah. Distant cousin. Yeah. But my dad actually is part owner and operates a chain of farm equipment dealerships that settled in Juniata County in the early 90s. And my mom now works for the dealership. She was a teacher at one point.
Right.
And so I grew up in Juniata County and represented the district that included Juniata and parts of Mifflin and Franklin, which is the 322 corridor between State College and Harrisburg.
Yeah, an important area, of course. Now, I'm willing to bet that not a lot of people that went to high school or college with you ended up in the State House. Were you thinking when you were a kid that, that's where I'm going to be? I'm going to run for office. I'm going to win. I'm going to be in the State House of Representatives in PA. Is that what you thought to yourself as a young person?
Not quite, but my grandfather had actually served in the legislature for a number of years. And I got to see from an early age a lot of work that he did he was a dairy farmer before he got elected. So I got to see work that he did with agriculture and conservation and environmental stewardship. And I got to hear a lot of stories about how this job could be effective at a pretty early age.
Right, so you were encouraged in that regard. When did you make the decision that you were going to run for office?
I didn't actually have a lot of time to make that decision.
What happened?
I had been working for a congressman at the time in Washington, and he actually decided that he was retiring, so we all had to find something. When your boss goes, that's when you have to go.
That's right.
And it actually turned out within a week or two, who ended up being my predecessor in the State House decided that he was retiring as well. And it was a great opportunity to serve the people I love using my skill set of writing legislation and having it be enacted into law.
So you threw your hat in the ring. Did you have other opponents? Were there other people that were running as well in for that House seat?
In that first race, it was a pretty safe Republican seat, as you already mentioned. And there ended up being 9 of us in that Republican primary.
Wow, that's pretty crowded.
It was.
Yeah, it's a lot. So did you have to raise a lot of money? And
I didn't. I actually just knocked on every single likely voter's door that I could to introduce myself and my message. And I ran on a message of trying to be positive, and I think people were trying to tear others down too much right now in our political climate, which I know is the message you preach as well. Yeah, so I ran on that message and ran on my expertise and what I could bring to the table.
Were you a Christian guy when you ran for the State House?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
So you're a Christian guy. So you're going door to door, you're knocking, hi, I'm John Hershey. I'd like to be your representative. And people received you into their homes pretty warmly, I'm guessing.
They did. It's actually not a very common thing for state office, people showing up at your door and asking for your vote.
Yeah.
So I always thought that it was. I thought that's how you won a race.
Yeah.
And thankfully, it turned out that is how you won a race.
Yeah.
But at the time, I was received pretty warmly. It was a great experience.
Yeah. So your dream comes true. You win that crowded primary. You're the nominee. It's a safe Republican district, so you know that if you win the nomination, you're likely going to be elected in the fall. And you get elected in the fall. And what's that first term like for you in the State House?
Oh, it was a great experience. The State House in Harrisburg, in some respects, is similar to Washington, but in some respects, it's totally different as well. Pennsylvania is incredibly diverse, as you know. Even Republicans from this area near Philadelphia are totally different from Republicans in my part of the state.
Yeah.
And same with Democrats from my part of the state versus Democrats from Philadelphia or elsewhere. And so learning that diversity and getting your feet under you, and we actually had a pretty significant issue that I got to work on right around the time that I first got elected that got my feet wet and kind of got the ball rolling with that.
Yeah. You know, there's not a different Bible for Democrats than for Republicans. You know, God's Word encourages everybody who seeks to follow Christ to love their neighbor like they love themselves, and doesn't say, you know, like but if your neighbor, only if your neighbor agrees with you. And so that's a challenge. I mean, what was it like being in the State House, you know, being somebody who's a believing Christian person and being surrounded by people, even like you said, in your own party, who may have been very different from you, who may have seen things differently than you did?
Well, I think at the bottom line, we do have to treat people like Christ commands us to love our neighbor as ourselves. And if you choose to see other humans created in the image of God, of course, political differences should fall by the wayside at that point. So you can disagree with ideas or disagree with what the person is trying to promote without actually putting the person down themselves.
Right. So anybody watching will say to themselves, you know, this guy is one of the bright lights. It would be a blessing to have this guy represent me in the State House. You were gifted to serve for how many terms?
2 terms.
For 2 terms in the State House, so 4 years in the State House. And then something unscripted, at least unscripted to us, happened, which is as the lines were redrawn, you ended up being forced to run against somebody in your party to keep that seat. And was that a shock?
It was, yes. And the way what they call gerrymandering typically works, when one party is in control of drawing the maps, the way it typically works is you play with the edges of those legislative boundaries to give one party over another an advantage. But in our case, something pretty unprecedented happened, and there were 14 incumbents of one party. In my case, I'm a Republican. There were 14 incumbent Republicans drawn into districts together that had to run against one another.
Nice.
But my region was faced with a scenario where if I lost my race, we were losing a state representative, we were losing a state senator. Our Senator Jake Corman, he was running for governor, and they actually moved his Senate district to a different part of the state as well. And we were also losing our U.S. congressman because our U.S. congressman was drawn into a district with another representative.
Who's your congressman?
Fred Keller is his name.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, our area and within a 20, 30 mile radius of my house, we were totally losing our representation in Harrisburg and Washington. So despite facing a population disadvantage, I decided to take the plunge and run again because I just believe that my neighbors needed somebody to stand up for them in Harrisburg and somebody to advocate for what they want.
So for people who are in politics, we know that running is more than just a notion. You know, it takes money, it takes support. You have a campaign team. You've got to raise capital in order to get your name out there and your message out there as well. You don't just say you're going to run and then hope that things turn out the way you want. So you've probably had a campaign staff, I'm guessing?
I did, and at our level in rural Pennsylvania, typically you can have a paid staff. I did have paid staff designing my mail and my advertisements, but the really boots on the ground team for me I call my wife and my parents.
Yeah.
So my wife, Wendy, and my parents, Brad and Sandy, they poured hours into this campaign, even just to the point of setting it up and distributing yard signs.
So what did the smart people who look at all the polling data, what did they say to you, what did they tell you needed to do to win this seat? Because this is a new seat, actually. Now, this is not the same one that you'd already won twice. The demographics are slightly different here. You're running against another Republican. How many were in the race? You and one other, or
just me and one other? Yes.
So you and one other. Two incumbent Republicans were running against each other now, and so what were you told by the people that you pay to help you win? What were you told that you needed to do to win?
The smart money would have said to cut him down, find something in his record that wouldn't have aligned with traditional Juniata Valley or Perry, Mifflin County Republican values. But I decided not to do that. I decided to run on my own record and try to promote what I'm all about.
Why?
I think that voters are just tired of hearing what's wrong with the other guy. This is why you should elect me.
Yeah.
And I had a good legislative record. Still do. I'm still in the legislature currently. But I had a good record and had a good record of results delivering discretionary grants and things like that to my community. And I just believed that I could win promoting that rather than find something else in my opponent's record that I might have even voted for as well and promoting what was wrong with what he did.
Right. What did your opponent do to you?
He did not necessarily afford me the same respect. So the hope would be that we would run as promoting our own ideas. We respected each other. We were respected in the legislature. But unfortunately, he brought up things like the mail-in voting that have been talked about ad nauseum in Pennsylvania politics, or things like the state-sponsored retirement plan, things like that. Unfortunately, things that he could pick at that were less savory about my own record.
Right.
And in some cases, I believe that the truth was misrepresented in some ways.
Yeah. I understand that. I was a candidate. I've been a candidate a couple of times, but I was the party nominee for Congress once upon a time, and in a district, and I didn't do any negative campaigning, but my opponent chose to do negative campaigning on me, and the negative campaigning wasn't even true. We didn't have the time or the money to be able to refute what he was saying, but the negatives that he put out there were completely untrue about me, and I didn't even have a chance to say that it wasn't true, and he knew it wasn't true. And after the campaign ended and he won, he called me up and apologized and said, "I'm so sorry that we had to do this. Said, I know that none of that stuff was true, and you're a good person, but I needed to do what I need to do to keep my seat." And for too many people in politics, I fear that's that's the calculus. The calculus is, well, at the end of the day, Hershey's a good guy, but I got to do what I have to do to keep my seat, and if it means I have to go negative or try to find something in his record and distort it to make to weaken him, or to cast doubt in the minds of voters about him, then I'll do that, because that's the only way I'm going to win. I just wonder to myself, at the end of the day, all this is transitory. Even the seats we hold, they only last for a while. And you know what? In time, people even forget who held that darn seat. The people forget who was in the state house and who wasn't. The family members remember. You remember your grandpa was there, of course, and you remember that you were there. But people forget, and because time moves on and everything's transitory. But what matters is what you did when you were there, and when you had the chance to make a decision. Did you make the right one? Ultimately, we all have to answer to God. What I love about what you told me was that for you, the most important thing was being who you are as a Christian and not distorting your opponent's record for the sake of short-term gain. Because to do that would mean that you'd have to be a little dishonest and mean. And there's nothing about God's spirit that is mean or dishonest or tricky. The spirit that God puts in us is one of love, which means that you care about people as much as you care about yourself, and kindness and generosity and forgiveness and patience. All those things are associated with God's spirit in us. And you demonstrated that. Temperance, which is self-control, Like, it's really easy to say, well, you know what, I'm going to look the other way and not control myself or my appetite for gain and to win. And I'm going to shut my eyes and let's do this thing. Do these negative ads and destroy this guy because I got to win ultimately. And then I can apologize when it's all done. But you chose not to do that. You chose not to do that. You could stand before your maker and God would be pleased with you because you made the right decision to not go negative, to not. Jeff Coleman, who you know and who's producer of this show, has really talked about that extensively, about civility, about basically just being, if you call yourself a Christian, if you self-identify as a Christian, be that, wherever it is God puts you, including in the political arena. Be that person and then be true to it. Even when nobody's looking, even when you have the chance to not be it, still be that. And I just have the highest regard and respect for you, Brother John, because you did that. You did that. Now, the reality of being God's person in the short term is painful because you didn't win that primary, did you?
I did not. No, I did outperform the natural population, the natural political geography, but I did end up losing by about 10 percentage points.
Right. And so the people who are paid to do polls and the like would have said, Hershey's a rising star. If he had gone negative, he probably would have won that seat. And truth be told, actually the final chapter hasn't been written on John Hershey, has it? I mean, John Hershey's a young guy, and maybe you lost his primary, but we don't know what God has in store for you. But we do know that God uses every situation, including even our losing ones, for his purpose and glory. And Lord knows how many people might have been changed or even have changed today in this program, knowing that you did the right thing and that you did what Christian people are supposed to do, even when you didn't have to. You could have done the politically expedient thing, and you might be on this show today saying, I won the primary, and then saying, but I apologize for the fact that I had a lapse of judgment and I went negative on a very good person. And apologies are always accepted. God certainly accepts our apologies and forgives us, but what a blessing that you don't have to apologize for that because you did the right thing.
And I do feel very confident in the campaign that we were able to run. The money, the consultant class in Harrisburg would tell you to do that negative thing, though,
right,
to try to keep the seat. Keeping that seat is
everything.
The most important thing.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, so, we don't know what God has for you. I mean, you're a very young man. How old are you?
28.
There you go. So at 28 years old, I don't know if 20-year-olds that retire and say, well, I'm done. What do you think God may have in store for you?
I haven't quite figured that out yet, but the one encouraging thing, and I shared this message at the Commonwealth Prayer Breakfast last week, is that, of course, we know the story of Job, and he went through much more difficult things than losing an election, to be sure. Lost family members, lost everything he had.
Right.
And God never explains that suffering at the end. And I just lost my election a week ago, so I haven't had any of this explained to me yet. But Job acknowledges at the end that God's plan is far too wonderful for any of us to know. And that's without God explaining it. That's without Job really understanding what just happened to him. But at the same time, you can take solace in that because God's plan is more wonderful than I could possibly know right now, even though I might not know what is coming next in my life. Since I just lost a week ago and I'm a state representative for 5.5 more months, I don't quite know what I'm doing yet.
Yeah. Well, you have certainly time to figure that out, and I'm sure there'll be no dearth of offers to you from people who would want to take advantage of your experience federally as well as in the state to help them with their work. So you'll have lots of opportunities, and I wouldn't discount a future run for office. Clearly, you have a base of support where you are. And maybe God has that in store for you yet going forward, and is using this loss to strengthen you and to help you in your walk as a Christian. And Lord knows who you've already touched by virtue of your choosing to do the right thing. When we come back, I want to ask John to reflect a bit on his time in the Capitol and how has he grown? How has his faith been tested? What, if any, advice he's ready to give the next up-and-coming generation of public servants to help them succeed? We'll be right back.
You're watching Joe Watkins' State of Independence on Lighthouse TV. Positively different. Share your comments about today's program in the comment box at joewatkins.org.
Representative John Hershey won't be returning to the Pennsylvania House of Representatives this fall after losing his seat to a fellow Republican in the primary, but we don't know what God has in store for him yet. He may be back. He chose to avoid negative campaigning, but that choice may have cost him more than a few votes. So I know there's a verse in the Bible that says something to the degree of, what does it profit a man, or for that sake a woman, to gain the whole world but to lose his soul? And when you run for office, as I've done and as you've done successfully in the past, you do feel like you gain the whole world. When you win, certainly you feel like you've gained the whole world. You've got people cheering for you. You have a seat at the table in Congress. You're one of a very small number of selected people chosen to lead, and that's a wonderful place to be. But what does it profit somebody to gain the world and to lose their soul? And you made the choice to not lose your soul. You didn't compromise who you were or what you believed just to win in the short term. And in the long term, it means you end up winning the victory, which is in Christ, which is the most important thing. You've got, with God's will, lots of time left to live and to serve. We don't yet know what the next chapter is for you. But what would you advise somebody? I'm sure there are young people watching this right now, and they're listening pretty intently to you. You're a young guy. You may not be much older than they are, and they may have the same career path hopes, to maybe go to Washington and to work for a member of the House or the U.S. Senate, or to work in Harrisburg for their state member in the House or their state senator. What would you tell them? I mean, they hear this and they say, wow, like I was going to go there and I'm a Christian person, but I was ready to slash and burn, do what I had to do, play by the rules that are out there as opposed to God's rules. And now they hear you saying, you played by God's rules, and this time you came up short. What do you say to them to encourage them that a life of service in government could be a good thing, or that working for a member of the House or the Senate is a good thing? What would you say to them?
Well, at the end of the day, I would say that your soul is the most important thing. You have to answer for those decisions that you make one way or another at the end of your life. But at the same time, I do believe that it can be done. I believe that there's a place in government for honesty, for standing on your own principles rather than cutting anybody else down. And while it might be temporarily unsuccessful in my race, I do believe that those things can win in the end. And whether it's not winning a political race, that's not always the thing that matters. You already mentioned people forget who we are
right.
in a span of at my level in the state government in a span of months.
That's
if
right.
I leave office.
That's right.
And at the end of the day, if we are to be elected as Christians who are serving the people that we represent, you have to remember that seat belongs to the people. It doesn't belong to the Honorable John Hershey.
Right.
So I think that's the biggest principle that you could remember as a legislator or as a public servant, is that at the end of the day, you are served to elect those people you love. And certainly back home, that includes my family, and it includes businesses I've worked with my entire life. And so I can hold my head high saying that I represented them with the values that I've always wanted to see in my state legislator. And that's I think the most important thing is, again, you do have to answer for these questions eternally, and not always in the moment, whether you're successful or not. I'm not so sure that matters in the grand scheme of things.
Right. Well, you're smart to know that all this is for the time being. I once served on the presidential commission, which was nice. You do your work, but maybe the nicest part of it is you get this really nice piece of paper, this parchment that has your name and calligraphy, your name and your state, saying that the President of the United States has appointed you to this commission. And so, but if you read all the words at the very end of the citation, it says "for the time being," and I thought to myself, that is so appropriate and so true. I mean, it's all for the time being. None of it lasts for very long. And so while we're there, we're meant to be God's person and to love people like we love ourselves and to do the right thing, all of which you've done. It's an honorable profession, right? I mean, if you had to do over again, you would do it, I'm sure.
I would. I got to accomplish a lot of things for my community that I'm not saying that if one of my other opponents had beaten me in 2018 that they wouldn't have done as well.
Right.
But at the same time, I got to accomplish a lot of things for my community, and we got to help a lot of people, myself and my staff, and we really also got to meet a lot of people that we wouldn't have otherwise, that are accomplishing some really amazing things in the Juniata River Valley that I wouldn't have otherwise met.
Do you think that term limits are a useful tool? Because some people would say that it becomes hard for folks when they get elected to realize, you already said it, you said it's not your seat, it's the seat belongs to the people that you serve, and you're there to fill it for the period that you're there. But do you think that term limits serve a useful purpose? It's something we talk about. We don't have that we don't have it yet in Pennsylvania, and in a lot of other places we don't have it either. But the whole idea of limiting the number of terms that members can serve is a way to make sure that it continues to be about the people and not about the people who get elected to those seats.
I think they could play a role. I would push back on that a little bit and say that my voters just handed me my term limits because they handed me my walking papers, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But the one thing I would be concerned about is just that we're not ceding power to lobbyists or staff in Harrisburg, because ultimately we are the ones that have to drive home every night and talk to voters and answer to them. Or in my case, I can drive home every night. I live 45 minutes from Harrisburg. But I think there's a place for that, and I think there's certainly a place for limiting the revolving door of legislators going to lobby and things like that. But that would be the one concern I would have, is just that hopefully we're not ceding powers to that revolving door of lobbyists.
Yeah, very smart man. I love your answer and your thoughtfulness. I want to thank Representative Jonathan Hershey for reflecting on his time in public service. The scripture offers a stern warning for those who aim to gain the whole world at the expense of one's own soul. It's always encouraging when you see someone believe and then act in a way that honors God. Drop me a line in the comment box at joewatkins.org. From America's First Capital, Philadelphia, I'm Joe Watkins. Thanks so much for watching. God willing, I'll see you next week. Thanks so much, John. This was excellent.
Good.
I mean, your answers are so thoughtful and on point, and I think anybody watching would say to themselves, this is who we want serving us. We want.
Joe Watkins' State of Independence is a production of Lighthouse TV, positively different, made possible in part because of the support of viewers like you.